Thank you so much for tuning into TruthWorks this year.
We're taking a short break over the festive period, but we can't wait to be back with more great conversations in the new year.
So we thought we'd share with you one of our favorite episodes you might have missed.
Don't forget, if you've got a career confession, a guest suggestion, or a topic you want us to dive into, you can get in touch with us. There's a link in the show notes. Thanks.
I could go into HR.
You could.
I'd be fired right away.
Yeah, at the right company, you'd be fine.
Because I'd be like, shut
But that's
up.
what
Stop
that's what they
talking.
need.
Oh, I never, ever said that to anyone.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
Hi there, this is Patty, and we are beyond thrilled to have as our guest today, Kara Swisher. Kara and I met about 10 years ago when I had the privilege of sitting in the red chair and doing a podcast with her. And Kara Swisher is, of course, the famous tech reporter who's been reporting on the tech scene for a really long time now, since
1990s. 30 years.
Yeah, you started your career sort of when I started mine in tech. I started Netflix in 97. So I
94 for me.
94 for you. So anyway, I listen to Kara every day, and Kara is the journalist who, when I listen to her every day or see her every day or read her every day, I go, oh, hell yes, girl. So I'm hoping we'll get some of those conversations in today. So back to my story about being in the red chair. Your producer stopped us after about 5 minutes, and he said, put your headphones down. He looked at Kara and he said, Kara, how many fucks are you allowed to say per broadcast? And you
as
said,
many as I want,
well,
Patty.
I don't know. And he said something like 5, and you two have totally blown it. So with that introduction, you'll see what we're up to.
Well, fuck that. Fuck that.
Yeah, fuck that. Yeah. So I know you got a book coming out. We can't wait to read it. But I want to talk about you. And I don't know that many people get to do that. So I thought that would be our privilege today.
I'd love to.
Yeah. I want to go back. I was looking that one of the things you thought about doing was not being a spy, but doing like spy reconnaissance or.
Yeah, I was. It actually is a little deeper than that. I actually do talk about it in the book, of which there are no fucks in this book. So it's kind of the anti Elon Musk biography.
Well, now that you're in the belly of the corporate beast, you can't do that anymore. Yeah,
I'm not a corporate beast. I'm an entrepreneur. I own all my IP myself, which we can talk about. My dad, who I write about in the book, actually died when I was 5 of a cerebral hemorrhage, was in the Navy. He had just left the Navy when he died. And I had a lot of my family in the military and wanted to join the military or at least do some sort of service. And I wasn't able to because I was gay. And at the time, the various times, it was illegal. And then it was don't ask, don't tell. And by the time they passed anything that was even not reprehensible, I was too old. And so I had hoped to do something like that. And I thought military intelligence I'd be good at. I had thought about being the CIA, government service. But at the time, and people forget, I think it's kind of interesting that the Tracy Chapman song is resonating again, because it brings me back to those times of real. It's astonishing, that music was so important. That album, not just that song, of the Reagan administration and what was happening then. And it was sort of at the beginning of the AIDS crisis was happening, all kinds of things. And so I wasn't able to be who I wanted to be when I was in college or when I graduated college in 1984, excuse me. So I wanted to be a spy. I wanted to be in military service, and I would have been a fantastic admiral. I would have been. I would have been so good for this country. I would have been like leading the troops now somewhere. And, I'd thought about the State Department, but there was all this. There was a scandal around a guy named Clayton Lone-Tree. People don't remember this, but it was all about being gay was one of the no-nos,
That's
really.
Right. That's right.
And, there's a great I don't think it's on Netflix, but I think it's on Peacock, Fellow Travelers.
Uh-huh.
And it's about that earlier, much earlier, which was really heinous. But it was heinous then, too. It was pretty sneaky and heinous.
So what I was thinking when I read that about you was, so you just opted for a different kind of spy career.
That's right. I could still be a spy. You don't know it. It could be the longest con in history of studying the internet people. And I'm the one reporting back to the government. No, it's going to start a conspiracy theory by Tucker Carlson.
So let's move from that to like, okay, so you couldn't get into the services. What about journalism? Are you an entrepreneur because that's the path you had to forge?
No, I was the yearbook editor in high school, but that didn't really prepare me for anything, but except, people being angry about their photographs. But I was a journalist in college. I went to Georgetown, and it was my backup school. It was a backup school back then. People don't remember that because now it's hard to get into, but it wasn't at the time. And I didn't get into Brown, which was devastating to me, or Stanford. I know. And so I went there, and it was super anti-gay, also anti-women. Like, it was so sexist and homophobic. So I found solace in working for the newspaper there called La Jolla. And I was going to leave. I was going to transfer up to New York to Barnard or Columbia. And I started writing columns, and they got very popular very quickly when I was a freshman. And there was one particular person who remains a friend to this day named Roberta Oster, who was like, "You're not leaving. You're my star columnist." And I was really good from the get-go. I was super popular. I won the journalism award that year, which was usually won by a senior. And I realized I was good at it. Like, people liked what I had to say and also how I said it. And it turned out I was a pretty good reporter, too. And so I ended up starting a journalism course at Georgetown. They didn't have one. I pushed for one, and then went to Columbia Journalism School. And I also worked for the Washington Post during college as a stringer. I got myself a job after I complained about their shitty coverage of Georgetown to one of the editors on the phone. I got him on the phone, and he had me take a bus down to 15th and L Street in Washington. And he thought I was so obnoxious, but he hired me on the spot, which is, I think, one of the qualifications as a journalist. So I just did it. I just kept doing it.
So, Kara, was the allure sort of on this spy element of, seeking the truth, exposing things, or was it?
I was interested. I was curious about the world, and it was a good way to relate. I was always a good writer. I was always a strong writer, and it was a way to relate to people. I'm sure I like the audience. I do like the audience. There's an element of narcissism to journalism that's very clear. Also, knowing things first and getting them out there. I also really hate liars. I hate liars. I can't even tell you. I don't know what it is, but I don't like people who don't characterize things the way they happened. And I was like that as a kid. I was always like, no, that's not what happened, kind of thing. And so I like that. And then I also, luckily, very early, even though I covered a lot of stuff, I worked my way up at the Washington Post. I delivered mail there. I was a news aide. I delivered page proofs, all kinds of things, and worked my way up eventually to a job through a long series of small jobs and some really terrible ones outside of the Washington Post with like John McLaughlin, the TV show host who sexually harassed women. But I always was sort of a speak truth to power kind of gal. And maybe it was because I was gay. There's a joke that, lesbians don't hate men. They don't have to sleep with them. So I like men. I love my brothers. Your kids, yeah. I love my kids. I have 3 sons. But I got along with men very well. And so I like at the time, it was a much more male-dominated business. It isn't at all, actually. It's much more so than other industries, much more diverse, not as diverse as you want it to be, but much more diverse. And so I just liked it. I liked sort of getting into things. I was a curious person. And then I came on to tech relatively quickly in the 1990s, about 6 or 7 years after I covered retail. I covered all kinds of stuff. I got into tech I was at Duke University doing a fellowship, a very short fellowship, and started using the internet. And the minute I saw it, I was like, oh, this is a big deal, And I had studied propaganda at Georgetown at the Foreign Service School, and I was very interested in propaganda and the uses of communications to manipulate populations. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, look at this, right? Like when you saw TV or radio for the first time.
Yeah.
I would imagine people had or the printing press, like, oh.
So remember the days when all the same kind of fears about the internet. I worked at Sun then. right?
Sun Microsystems.
Sun Microsystems. And I remember I had done this. I ran diversity then back in the 80s. And I had taken Eric Schmidt to do a talk at the Black Society of Engineers, right? And he was late. We were the only two white people. I'm like, fuck. You know, what am I going to do? I got this dweeby, dorky guy. And he stood up in front. And he remained so. I mean, except for his picadillos. Anyway, he got up and he talked about this is the future of global communication, that, you know, this is the democratization of speech. This is, and at the time, nobody talked about it that way at all. We were like, maybe we can send pictures. Right? I mean, our Netflix website was like a list of things. You know, Craigslist was the most sophisticated at AOL
at the time. Yeah. Actually, I wrote a book about AOL later, but I covered AOL. That was the company in the Washington area, so that's why how I really. And they gave me the beat because I showed a vague interest in it was called online services at the time. Yeah, and I showed a vague interest, and I was the young person. I was 30 or whatever, how old I was. So they're like, oh, let's give it to the young person. You know. Who couldn't use a computer. And so it was interesting, but it happened that one of the hubs of the internet is in Washington, Meg East. And so that's how it was AOL, because AOL was just in Vienna, Virginia. And they were small. And
they were the thing.
No, but they weren't. They weren't initially when I met them, but then they were. Yeah. And then as the 90s got to mid-1990, it suddenly got huge. And I ended up writing a book about that journey of Steve Case. Ironically, he's about to throw me my book party for this one. But it was a journey. And then once I got onto that, you jumped from there to Yahoo, Netflix, Netscape, all the others. And so nobody was covering the internet. Nobody. Like, it was considered CB radio for sure, the way you're talking about it. And I was totally intrigued, and I realized what was going to happen, especially with AOL was the first consumer application that really stuck with consumers, including that famous outage. Do you remember that when it had that outage? And everyone lost their fucking minds, like, when that happened. And I was with Steve Case when it was happening. He's like, well, I don't know why they care. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is going to be national news.
Right. So like electricity at that point.
It was. It started to be like that. And not everybody got it, but certain people did. And so I met Walt Mossberg, who is the famous Wall Street Journal tech reviewer, who was very early to this stuff. And he got me to come to the Journal because they didn't have anybody. They had computer reporters. As you said, they had people covering Sun and Microsoft, which did software, et cetera. Right. But they didn't have anyone covering the internet. And that was me. Yeah. And even then, it was disrespected. Someone said I was the CB radio reporter. And I was like, are you kidding me? Do you not understand?
Meanwhile, we're in the Silicon Valley.
Right.
Jessica and I, right? And we're there thinking, doesn't everybody know this is going to be the way the world's going to work?
That's right. That's right. Even Scott McNeely, who is not my favorite person anymore.
Not my favorite. When I ran diversity at Sun, he said to me, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, Patty. Mine was platinum.
That sounds like him. His version of diversity is a white guy in a different tie. But he said that one thing, there's no privacy, get used to it. That was a critically important idea that he put out there.
Yes. And I mean, and inside the company where we weren't allowed to use any Microsoft products or anything evil like that, we were doing really sophisticated stuff that didn't become part of the way. I mean, I remember I had to learn VI.
Yep.
Right. To send an email, I'd have to write a little piece of code to send an email. But it was a harbinger of what was going to become. I will also tell you, not at that time, but a little bit later, it was probably at Netflix, somebody said, if Kara Swisher ever calls you, beware.
That is true. I heard the same thing.
You did?
Yes.
That's a good piece of advice. But beware in a good way. Beware, you were about to meet the finest tech reporter in the land. But I was. I mean, honestly.
Kara, I will say this is what I appreciate about you is that you do it so differently, I feel, than many other journalists. You have this, you're transparent, you're honest, but there's this like holding people accountable. And I don't know, I feel like everybody placates to a lot of these very famous leaders, and they do the like head nodding, like, oh, Elon, you're so, or Mark, or whatever.
Mark Zuckerberg.
And look, like maybe they're starstruck a little bit. I don't know. These are very smart people who have done important things.
or they're too snarky, right?
Yeah.
There's also that element of like what happened is then they suddenly got mad at them, like as if they're daddy or something. Disappointed them. And Walt was the one who really got me because it drove him crazy. Because one of the things I loved about Walt is if he liked something, he just liked it. He wasn't a fanboy. He just like, I like this and here's why. And he did the reporting. And when he didn't, he's like, I don't like this. And let me tell you why. And that's why he was so trusted by people.
I was thinking the phrase you used earlier, like speak truth to power.
Right.
That's such a modern concept, right? And it's such a nice way of saying you just don't bullshit, right? He just didn't tolerate it.
And I think he told me, he said, go in with cleats on, but be fair. He always was like, be fair, be transparent, because he felt that, I think the reason he recruited me is because we were sort of kindred souls in this, is that he was like, I want you to really tell people what's happening because it's so important. He loved tech. So do I, right? Mm-hmm. And the bullshit levels were so high. Like one of my first articles for the Wall Street Journal when I got there was about their stupid names that they had to put. They all had their dumb names that, Chief Yahoo or Chief.
Look at where we came from, like Chief People Officer, Chief Happiness Officer.
Right. Yeah. So
it was crazy.
Sake. Yeah, exactly. And so I was always sort of struck by the performative nature of everything. And then also the fanboy. And that a lot of reporters who covered it before me were literally just gadget fanboys. Yeah. And I think that was, and it was boys. It was all boys. Let me tell you, it's not impugning men, but it just was. That's what the facts of the matter was. I used to call it the sausage fest. So it was easy to be different in that regard. And the second thing is, I really thought it was a big deal. And so I wanted these people to be responsible for what they were about. They were very important people, and they would soon become very wealthy people, which also gives you a certain power, deserved or undeserved, where you have an ability to change people's lives. And so I always felt like it was my responsibility to keep them honest and to focus on the ones that were good or at least had good tendencies.
Yeah.
I had no time for them to give me lines of crap, right? I just didn't. I just don't have time.
Another theme I want to explore is like leadership and what you've seen. Like, and Jessica's working with startups now. So it's like, they come in, I'm from Texas. They come in wet behind the ears. They just can't help it,
Yeah.
So you've watched so many of them grow up and the eras. I mean, I think about the Scott McNeely, the Larry Ellison, even Steve Jobs era of, Larry epitomizes the, we can only have our offsites helicopter skiing because, we're quien es más macho. So what is sort of the cycle that you see? Is there a cycle of like wide-eyed to like, oh shit?
No, I don't. I don't buy so I think a couple things that sort of struck me right away instantly was the juvenilization of men, right? Because look, these were mostly all men. Again, it just is. Like people go, oh, Kara's so anti-man. I'm like, it just was. That's who it is. Like, look at the numbers. It's easy to see. It's also white men.
Yeah.
And so, this idea that they are not responsible for themselves or they needed adult supervision, that always drove me crazy. I'm like, they're adults. Why do they need adult supervision?
Right.
Except for maybe like, I did meet Sam Altman when he was maybe 19, or maybe Snapchat, Evan Spiegel, who has evolved quite nicely, actually.
Oh, thank God.
He was young.
No,
he was young.
I met him young and I was like,
please, that guy,
God.
Right? He's wonderful, actually.
I've heard he has really changed.
Well, he actually called me a couple of years ago and he's like, I think I have a real problem with diversity at this company. And he's sort of like in the Mark Cuban level. He's like, I think it's going to help my company if he wasn't doing it for performative reasons. And I said, you need better PR and to talk to yourself and have smart people around you. And I think it should be more women. That's all. And I said, I'm going to put you together with 4 of the communications people I like the best in my career. And you're going to go to lunch with them and you're not going to speak. You're just going to listen.
Ooh! And
eventually you're going to hire one of them. And that's what happened, which was interesting. And I thought that was, he faces challenges that are more secular and business oriented, but it's a wonderful product. So what was different was I didn't revere them, but I didn't disrespect them either. Like if people were coming at me straight, I would do it. At the same time, I had a bit of humor about it. I mean, speaking of Eric Schmidt, he was known for just saying stupid things sometimes, like publicly, because he was sort of...
He's so geeky.
He's and arrogant, too, you know, kind of thing. And so at Recode, we had a ball gag that we had a picture of him with a ball gag that we made up with Photoshop. And every time he did it, we're like, bring out the ball gag. And at one point, he's like, that's not very nice. And I said, stop saying stupid things and we'll stop using it. It's just,
I'm sure their head of
super easy.
communications wanted to borrow that ball gag from you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, they did. They're like, keep putting it up, Kara, because it bothers them. But, I think it was just being honest. And the other thing underneath it is not just all fun and games, is we broke stories. Like we kept breaking stories, and people trusted us because we weren't trying to get them and we weren't trying to be slavish to them. Like we were just telling what happened. And I think people at companies had a lot of pride in a lot of these companies and wanted the right stories to be at. And so people are always like, how do you get so many stories? I'm like, because you're not listening to them.
Right.
You listen to me. So that's why they're telling me.
I think it's part of the tech MO. I mean, I think for me personally, it's why I love them. I always say, I love engineers. The world is good or bad. It's right or wrong. It's black or white. It's 0 or 1. And so the truth works for, actually, the name of our podcast is TruthWorks, right? Which is like,
it does.
Especially tech people. It's like, oh, okay, that formula, the math works.
Right. Exactly. And I also didn't mind, there's a part in my book I talk about Steve Jobs, who I like very much, actually, all kinds of warts on him, but that's okay. He actually would answer questions. He would debate you. He was an adult. He had juvenile sometimes. And he had his reality distortion field, but it was such an obvious version of that. Like, I'm going to wow you with my magic. But I got to tell you, if you really pay attention to a lot of our interviews, he talks about concepts that are now happening, right? Like he was a very thoughtful person.
Yeah.
And he was able, at least for me, and listen, he loved Walt. I was just the girl that was next to Walt, which I didn't mind. They had a great relationship. But one time when they had just introduced Ping, you don't remember, it was their social network. And they just weren't good at social networks. It's the only time, one of the only times they ever just reacted. They usually aren't reactive as a company, which is one of their strengths. And they introduced it and he came out. Walt wasn't there. So he comes over to me. He's like, oh, I'll talk to the girl. And he goes, what do you think? So he knew I knew. I covered Facebook and everything else. And I said, that is a shitty social network. And he's like, it is, isn't it? And I'm like, And he's like, yeah. And they dumped it right away. He didn't try to do the whole song and dance because he knew, right? He was mad at himself for putting it out, and which was not his. It is his fault. He's the CEO. So that was the kind of relationships I preferred. Reed was like that in a lot of ways. He was so grumpy. He could be so grumpy about lots of things.
He could be.
Yeah, but we debate, about when they had remember there was I don't even remember all the, someone's like, do you remember that? I'm like, I don't. Like when you had the whole mailing thing or when everyone thought you were dead because you switched over to digital. I didn't. I was like, oh.
I do.
I remember it.
It impacted our lives greatly, but that's why I remember.
I found one the other day, a Netflix disc. I was like, oh, look, I haven't returned it. I'm so sorry.
You don't have, in our collections, we actually have the plastic disc holder that Reed personally designed.
Oh, wow. Oh,
that he forced us to reproduce that had a weird logo that we had for 6 months. He's like, everybody, don't you think this is great? And we were all like, no, it's just...
No, then you went for paper. I have the paper one. I'm sure I owe thousands of dollars in return fees. But
we found a way to charge you, I'm sure.
No, they gave them all back when they closed down DVD. Yeah. So it's all yours, baby.
Thank you. I just like that. I like that he did that. Things like that, I would say good. And people would be surprised. They're like, isn't it a fuck up? I'm like, is it? Is it a fuck up or is it just smart? This is the way it's going. So I always appreciated, as grumpy as he could be, was fine. Mark Cuban was super grumpy at me at various times, but we had a dialogue. And those are the people I preferred to deal with versus some of the ones that later, Bezos used to be like that. Now, of course, is not. Musk was a very interesting character for a very long time and has changed almost irreparably, I think. And then some relationships, like with Evan, started off rocky and got good, over time. And I always felt ultimately they got that I was fair to them and would listen, but I didn't always agree. And those who were secure in themselves as people were fine with that. Those who were not had a lot of problems with me.
Well, Evan's a great story of what I met Evan in the early days and I was like, you can take him and I will leave him. I actually left in the middle of a meeting with him. But that's great to know that that there's the ability. Well, you have to. You won't survive.
You won't survive if you don't evolve.
Right. If you don't figure out how to grow up and lead an organization. So back to you. now I watch you on TV on Sunday afternoon. So with Chris. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa, is this the Kara I knew? And so tell me about going into, speaking of leadership, right?
Yeah.
To the belly of that beast from being the most entrepreneurial reporter kind of on the planet. Yeah.
Probably I am. Others have followed, like Casey Newton.
Yep.
I encouraged him. Casey was my tenant in my house. And I was like, stop complaining about your job and do something about it. Like, stop. I don't want to hear you anymore. Just pay the rent and stop complaining. But, Jessica Lesson, a lot of people followed in what Walt and I did initially at All Things D and then Recode. And, they did all kinds of different interesting innovations on us. We didn't get everything right at all. We probably should have had subscriptions, but you really couldn't at the time. We probably shouldn't have been as big, but at the time you needed that. So one of the things that fueled a lot of that for me was I hate to bellyache about where I am. Like, oh, I don't like my boss. It's always someone else's fault. But I'm not like that. I'm like, I always think it's not someone else's fault. They might be a jerk, but it's my fault for staying, right? I can pick my ass up and go somewhere.
We love you. Yeah. I mean, this is our mission from God. So if you hate it,
leave.
Walk.
Right. And one of the things that's important is to understand many people can't leave, right? People in certain blue collar jobs can't leave. People in other countries, they can't leave. And you as an educated, at least me, white American woman can leave. Yeah. I can go and do things. And I want to take away all the other, if you have mental problems or if you've been badly treated, sexually abused, stuff like that. I'm going to pull those away for a second. But I don't like being at a place where I'm not happy. And what I would say to people is, I'm a bad employee. I don't want to be your employee. I don't want to listen to you. And instead of complaining about your stupidity, I'm just going to go. And I think that's what I did. And then I realized, and especially when I'd see, when the Journal did its Saturday Journal, I was sitting in these meetings. I'm like, why are we doing this and not leaning into digital? It doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants the Saturday Journal. It's like an enema. Nobody wants it. And young people aren't going to read it. And at the time, I actually got kicked out of one meeting when I said you should tape a joint between every page because otherwise young people aren't going to read the Saturday Journal. So, and then I was like, I'm a jerk. I couldn't be here. And so I should run it myself, right? I should do what I want. And then if it's my mistake, it's my mistake. And that's it. That's it. That seems fair. It seems fair to me. And spending your life belly aching about your situation doesn't get you what you want. And so I was very good about defining exactly what I wanted. And one of them was I wanted to, just like the entrepreneurs I covered, it was on me kind of thing. And so that's why there was not much innovation in media at all at the time. Everybody wanted to work for the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. I worked at the Washington Post. I worked at the Wall Street. And I was like, I don't want to be here. I looked around. I was like, I don't want to be the editor of this. I think. And then at the same time, watching the digital trends, I was like, this isn't going to be here. If I'm being honest, this is finished kind of thing. And so I just assessed that. And I could have been wrong. They could have suddenly digital wasn't important, but I didn't think that. And so that's why I did it. And I still do it to this day. I'm 60 years old and I quit all the time. I left the New York Times relatively recently and I didn't think I was writing very good columns. And of course, people can stay there. I think it's like a velvet coffin for a lot of people. Yep. But I was like, I don't like these anymore. I wrote 40 good columns I like. Now I'm done, kind of thing. And so with TV, this is long way to get to TV. I've been on TV, on cable, lots and stuff. I've had different contracts with these things. And 2 years ago, I had an NBC contract and I didn't renew it. Everyone wants one. And I was like, oh, I just don't want to be exclusive. And it's so reductive. It was so reductive and silly that I just couldn't do it anymore. And I turned down a lot of them. And then Chris Wallace came to me and he goes, I have an idea I think you'll like. And oddly enough, it was the McLaughlin Group, which I had worked on to this day. And I thought, okay, I'll try this. Why not? Why shouldn't I try it? Yeah. And honestly, Chris, if I don't like it, I'll be gone. I'll just do something else. And if I had a career theory, I like to make things, so I should make things, whatever it happens to be. Podcasting was another thing I just jumped into when it wasn't big. It was 10 years ago.
I'm thinking, who else had a podcast in 20?
Nobody.
And nobody.
Well, Mark Maron and a couple of people, but nobody in our area for sure. And now everybody's copying them, right?
Mhm.
And so
Here we are.
we're copying.
yeah, and same thing with conferences. I'm going to do a conference that has real news. Nobody did that. And so, if I like this, I'll stay. And if I don't like it, I'll move on. And the theory that I have is something that I was a terrible science student. I was terrible. I didn't like it. I was not interested. I was bored. And my biology teacher one time got my interest when he said, everything's on its way to something else. And I was like, it is. Like he was talking about how things get destroyed and created, right?
Yeah.
It got my attention. Actually, I have 2 tattoos. One is entropy and one is syntropy, which is creation and destruction at the same time. And so I was like, it is on its way to something else. So I get an idea at some point. I'm like, I'm going to go on and do something else.
Mhm.
And I think people should think like that in their careers constantly.
And you learn through that journey new things to do. Like
That's correct.
you wouldn't have thought of the next thing. The science example is great. You wouldn't have thought of the next thing unless you did the old thing.
You can't make space. You cannot make space.
Yeah.
And the other thing with women, and I'll never forget this, is a woman, a very prominent Silicon Valley woman came to me and was leaving her job and was trying to figure out where to go. And she was at the second level. You know how all those women are at the second level. And I knew she wanted to be a CEO. She wanted to do that. Like she should have. She was fully qualified to do it. But she knew as I knew everything that's going on. So she was like, well, I've been offered this, 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 and this. And I was like, okay. And I said, so what do you want to do? And she goes, well, this is interesting. I said, didn't ask you that question. I asked you, what do you want to do? And she goes, well, I've been offered this. I said, that's like a girl in the 1910s who gets offered a marriage proposal. Like, I'm going to pick this man. Like, it's not your choice. This is what I was offered. I said, I didn't ask you that. I said, I don't think you've spent a day in your fucking life thinking about what you want to do, right? So I said, look, let me give you a different metaphor. You're in a restaurant and they have beef, chicken, and fish. Beef, chicken, and fish. I was like, and you want the duck? Order the fucking duck. And she's like, well, what if they don't have the duck? I said, they have the duck.
Somebody does.
The duck is there. It's in the back. I know it's in the back. And when you order the duck, you'll get the duck. And so just know what the duck is.
Right.
Like, what's the fucking duck? And she was like, what are you talking about? I was like, the duck. Get the duck. I was like,
I love it.
and she goes, oh, I don't like duck. I said, I don't care if it's duck. I was like,
give me whatever you want. Get the hamburger.
that's right.
Jessica, let's call this episode
Get the
I want the
fucking
fucking
duck.
duck.
Just get the fucking duck.
Get the duck. It's my theory.
I love
could go
that.
into HR.
You could.
I'd be fired right
Yeah,
away.
at the right company, you'd be fine. You'd be fine.
Yeah.
Because I'd be like, shut
But that's
up.
what
Stop
what they
talking.
need.
Oh, I never, ever said
Never
that.
do
Yeah.
that.
Anyone,
Patty and I would
right?
never say that. But
we would never
hush,
say.
little child.
no, I was talking to somebody today, and it was a CFO that's taken over HR, and he's like, "God, everybody just thinks they know how to do your job," and I was like, "Tell them to shut the fuck up.
Shut the fuck up.
That you can do that.
You know,
like you don't have to listen."
yeah, one of Waltz and my LLC when we started our company was called Shut Up and Listen.
Shut up and listen. But Kara, I love all that you said, but it takes, just like in this conversation with this woman that you're having, it takes a certain level of courage, right? And I don't know if it's fear that was holding her back from what she wanted, but to like leave and to get what you want, you kind of have to have clarity, yes, around what you want, but there's also just fear.
Well, I think that's put into women a
Yeah.
lot, right? But it's the idea. Like I speak to a lot of students, and they're often at very fine universities and stuff like that. And they're all in this achievement wheel. And I do this with my kids a lot. And like my son, when he didn't want to stay at NYU for a year because of COVID, he wanted to take a year off. He was nervous. He goes, well, I don't know what'll happen to Mike. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You're 20 years old or 19, like nothing. Tall, handsome white man in America. Like nothing, like no mental problems. You're a lovely guy. I'm telling you, there's not going to probably let's just pencil this one out. And he's like, Mom, cut it out. And I was like, no, I said, here's the deal. You should do that if you want to do that. And by the way, you got to get a job. That's my only thing is get a job. You can pay for yourself. Otherwise, I think if you don't step off the achievement wheel, if you don't step out of line, when you have the opportunity to do so, and again, many people do not.
Yes, that's true.
It's like not voting.
Yeah.
It's like if you're not voting, like I was talking to a bunch of students at AU the other day, and I was like, if you're not voting, you need to shut up. Like
That's
you
right.
have the privilege and opportunity to vote. Don't give me any bullshit. I don't want to hear what you have to say if you don't want to take what is an incredible privilege to live in a democratic society. And I do the same thing. And I think that's people, especially women, are, if you don't do this, you're not going to get married. If you don't do this, you're not going to get that. None of it is true at all.
Right.
And if it is, do something else. Like, there's always something else to do.
Or choose it, but choose it.
You're right. Exactly.
Right. It's a choice.
I love that. I love that. Oh, I just got goosies. I got goosebumps.
Yeah. One of the things I did realize is I didn't like managing. Like I didn't like it.
I remember talking to you about that.
And so it wasn't the best use of my time. And so I think my next book is going to be called Staff Zero. By the way, I have amazing people that work with me. I actually am not their managers. I have amazing people work, and it's no to them. It's I'm not good at it and I don't like it. And so I think about that. I'm like, just me. Yeah. Like, just me. Like,
but that may be the perfect way to do what you do. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat.
You but like Clint Eastwood, run him to town and come out. That's me.
Kara,
thanks for your time.
So wonderful.
Thank you. I hope that was fun.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you, Kathleen Speckert, and the whole Edit Audio team.